Hey, and welcome to Things Worth Learning. I'm your host, Matt Stauffer, and this is a show where a curious computer programmer, that's me, interviews fascinating people about their passions. My guest today is Michele Hansen, the co-founder of Geocodeio, which, by the way, is a freaking fantastic software as a service that we use regularly at Titan for geocoding addresses and that kind of stuff. Co-host of the Software Social podcast and the author of Deploy Empathy. If you know me at all, you know that I'm a big fan of empathy, and you also may know that I'm a big fan of Michele, so these together is just a wonderful thing. So Michele, hi. Would you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself, and whether it's your personal or your professional life, but just say hey to the people and kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah,
so as you mentioned, I am co-founder of Geocodeio, which started as a side project with my husband and I in 2014. And actually led to the first time I think I met you, which was at Laracon in 2017 when we spoke about, I think that talk was like scaling a side project from 0 to 6 figures. So I think we were around 100K or something a year at that point. So went full time in 2017. My husband went full time in 2018. So we have been running that full time for like basically 3 years now. And basically what we do is help people convert addresses to coordinates and coordinates to addresses, because computers only understand coordinates. They don't understand an address.
Right.
And similarly, humans don't really understand coordinates. We understand addresses. And then there's all these other kinds of data. For example, if you need census data or congressional districts or all that kind of stuff, time zones, you can only get that if you have the coordinates. So we help people do those address coordinate conversions, and then also helping with data that are sort of doorways from having those coordinates. So that's kind of my main job. But then, as you mentioned, I have other stuff going on. And which actually, I think you've talked about how you have ADHD as well, right? Yes, I have ADHD. So I have multiple things going on. So I always. So I co-host a podcast about having a software business or small software business called Software Social. Started that about a little over a year ago, like 14 months ago. Wow. And then I also wrote a book this summer called Deploy Empathy.
Just a little thing.
Yeah. And I'm so excited to talk to you because I know you totally nerd out on empathy as well.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you a million questions, but I have forced myself into the structure. So we're just going to get this question out of the way so we can start talking about empathy. Do you have any life mantras or phrases or ideas that you try to live your life by? And I know these may necessarily lead into the empathy conversation, but may not. So what does that kind of bring to your mind when I ask that?
So there is one quote that I do, and it's very personal to me. And it is a Bible quote. But before I say that, I want to say I'm not a super Bible quoting person. And I say that because people who quote the Bible, often they're going to be like, oh, what's wrong with that? And people who don't are going to be like, that's terrifying. So I'm not a super Bible quoting person, but I remember reading this in college and it just really hit me. And that is from 1 Corinthians, and it is, to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. Yeah.
For the
and
common
so
good.
I read that, and it's kind of feeling the sense of duty and purpose to not only discover what that is within ourselves, but also to pull that out from other people.
I love that. I'm going to take your quote and give another quote, but there's something I heard that had a very similar impact on me, where something like, blah, 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 what God needs is man fully alive, or something like that. And it was this, it's not from the Bible, it's some other thing, but it was based, the fullness of God is man fully alive. And of course, by man, they mean person. But it's similar to me, like it was a perspective that I hadn't had before. Like, the best thing you can do in life is figure out what makes you alive, and then help other people figure out what makes them alive. And it's a kind of this similar vibe of like, wow, that's a really interestingly simple way of saying like the common good, the good of the other person, the good, So anyway, I know that that's not exactly the same as what you said, but that's really interesting to me to have that as such a foundational thing. Do you think that does or does not have an impact on what we're talking about today? Like, is what we're talking about today a direct outflow of that or not? Or is it a minor reflection? Like, does it connect at all?
It's a really good question. And I have been thinking about that as I sort of, knew this question was coming in. I've kind of been thinking about it for a few days. And, to me, those interests sort of happen independently of one another in my life, right? Like, I remember reading that in college, and that was long before I had really learned very much about empathy. I wasn't in therapy at the time. Like, I didn't really know much about that. But kind of connecting the two, I can see how, empathy is about perspective taking and recognizing that other people's perspective is valid and that they are contributing something with that, even if you don't agree. And I think there is a commonality there with, seeing that, everybody has some uniqueness to bring to the world and framing it as, how do you pull that out? How do you pull that uniqueness out? How do you help yourself bring whatever your uniqueness is into the world, and also look for that in other people? I guess both of them look for context and look for further detail beyond the surface. So I think there is some commonality if I kind of stretch it, but yeah.
I mean, it feels very similar to me, but I honestly, I put you in the place to not only connect them, but also connect them before you even actually talked about the topic today. So sorry. But as you were talking, like my eyes start going up to my Mr. Rogers like guy right here. And I'm like, I don't know, it felt very Mr. Rogers-y to me about like, I think that you're wonderful and you have great things to offer. And I think I'm wonderful and have great things to offer. And we all together, anyway, you're speaking my language right here. I'm on an empathy nerd high right now. So, but let's actually transition to the actual topic.
Yeah.
So, this podcast is about one topic that you're really passionate about. So can you just introduce what are we talking about today, despite the fact that you've already said a little bit, and just kind of get us started. And I'm sure I'm going to have a million questions for you.
So I am passionate about empathy, which you are also passionate about.
Yes.
And I am passionate about it in the specific context of understanding customers and building products and delivering services that, help people do what they're trying to do better. And, how do business owners and people who make products and developers and everybody else, how do you figure out what it is that people are already trying to do? And then you can better sort of mold what you are able to contribute in a way that makes sense to them. And so the book is about, how do you interview people to understand what those needs are, whether it's before you build something or sell something, or, after you sold it, you want to figure out why they switched to you rather than doing what they did before, or why they've been a customer for several years, or why they canceled.
Yeah, it's just say, or why they left.
Whether they can use something that you made.
Yeah.
And in the core of that book is how to speak with empathy and use that to pull those things out of.
I love it. So first of all, everybody who has not read the book is now ready to go buy it, especially, and as well they should. You all could go check out Michelle's Twitter feed, and you could just see person after person after person talking about how absolutely amazing this book is. But I'm going to go in assuming that I've never read any of it. I've read some of it, but not the whole thing yet. And I get to be the idiot today and pretend like I don't know anything about it. So I know that you have kind of been doing the podcast circuit a little bit right now, and I've listened to quite a few of them. And one of the things everyone does to you on day one is just ask you to define empathy. And I'm going to do that to you too. So apologies. But I do think that the core understanding of what empathy is and isn't does shift a lot, like where we're going with this conversation. So I'm just going to do it to you. Can you tell me what is empathy, and are there any kind of like misconceptions that you want to unset? If anybody listening to this podcast has never heard you on another podcast or kind of just heard your pitch or read your book, like just give me like, where should my brain be as I start entering in this idea of deploying empathy in my conversations with customers or elsewhere?
So the definition I tend to use is Brene Brown's definition, which is basically taking on someone else's perspective as valid, regardless of your own perspective on a situation. And ahead of this, I was listening to one of your old talks on empathy from Laracon, and I noted how you went into definitions for cognitive empathy versus, I want to say you called it emotional empathy. Yeah.
I think so.
And
it's
so
not
what I'm more
that, yeah.
speaking to is sort of the cognitive empathy side of, I can understand that your perspective, like what is your perspective? Holding my own perspective aside and just trying to explore your experience, your perspective, your situation as much as I can from every angle that I can. Being a witness to your experience. Less so the emotional empathy side, which is often defined as taking on someone else's feelings and trying to feel what they are feeling. I don't really use that as much, and there's a couple of reasons why.
Yeah.
The first one is I don't, anyone is capable of cognitive empathy, of understanding someone else's perspective, of with enough practice, checking your own judgments and just saying, okay, I'm just trying to understand how they think about it. I already know how I think about it. Let's understand how they think about it.
Yeah.
Anyone can do that. And there are so many people who, for a variety of reasons, do not think they are capable of empathy, or maybe they have been told they're not capable of it, but they are capable of cognitive empathy, and it is a learned skill. And as Brene Brown says, anyone can learn empathy. With emotional empathy and the idea of taking on someone else's emotions, I almost think it's dangerous, because I think if people start from the perspective that I'm going to go into this and then I need to take on this other person's emotions, like, that's scary. If you don't have, strong emotional muscles and know where your boundaries are, know how to protect yourself, know how to get yourself out of a situation, it's kind of funny. I was thinking about this the other day, like that could be very scary for you, but I was thinking about this the other day, and you probably watched the Olympics, right? You probably saw Simone Biles in the vault, where she was supposed to do 2.5 twists and she did 1.5 twists. So one of the first things you learn in gymnastics when you're learning a new skill, because I'm also a gymnast, you learn how to do the skill, but you also learn how to fall.
Yeah, which I knew. Yeah.
You learn how to protect yourself. And when you practice it, you also practice falling. And I think about that with emotional empathy, because if you go in taking on someone else's emotions and you don't have, the muscle, that training, that ability to focus on what should happen and how to protect yourself in that situation, then it's scary and you don't know how to get out. And Simone Biles has enough skill to be able to fall out of that. And, to somebody who was watching that, they may not realize that she was supposed to do 2.5 and she just did 1.5. But she knew how to get out of it because she had those hundreds and thousands of hours of training on how to get out of that situation in this very complicated thing. And so emotional empathy, I think, is very difficult and not something that everyone can access, and maybe not something that everyone should access, because it could be quite threatening and sort of emotionally dangerous for you to get in that space. So I basically leave that to the side entirely and really only talk about cognitive empathy. And I think, as you've said as well, understanding someone's experience and their perspective, it can lead to compassion for their situation. It can lead to a little bit of, I can understand what that would feel like. That makes sense. And I think that's a safer place I think compassion is a safer place for people to be in than emotional empathy.
That's great. And there's I think it was something Brene Brown as well. But there's an animation that I used in my, I stole snippets of from my talk, where someone is down in a pit in a hole, and it's representative of depression or whatever. And they said, she was making the distinction of sympathy versus empathy. And she said, sympathy is like standing up at the top of the hole and yelling down, like, sucks to be you, basically. And empathy is like walking down into the hole with them. And I've always kind of thought a little bit about that is sometimes walking down the hole could be like you're talking about emotional empathy. It can be like, should I walk down into depression? But it is interesting to me because part of that illustration was walking down there and just putting their arms around the person. And so sometimes for me, I feel like if there is an emotional empathy that is a little bit healthier for the average human being to do, it's less about actually fully entering into somebody else's feelings. And it's a little bit more about like choosing to sit as close to them as you can and just comfort them, whether or not you're going to fully go there emotionally. And again, that's not the topic of our conversation today.
Act of empathy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I love what you're pointing out there. I do think that there's a lot of emotional danger. And with Simone Biles, one of the things that happened when she did that was all these gymnasts were like, hey, if I had just done what she did, I would have broken my spine, right? And that was what I think that was really what made it really click for me, is just how much skill it took for her to be able to recover from that situation. And like, we're not all therapists, right? And so like, there's going to be something that we can all do, and there's going to be something that only some of us can do, and that's perfectly okay. But one of the messages that I've heard from you loud and clear is that what we can all do is more than I think a lot of us think, right? Like, you are telling people, you all think there are people who are born empathetic and people who are not. And I'm telling you, you don't have to be Simone Biles of the empathy world. You can be just Joe Schmo, the empathy world, and you can still learn this set. And that's why you really focus on the cognitive, in addition, because it makes the most sense in your context, right? So like the Joe Schmoes, all of us normal people who may not have been born super empathetic can learn some skills. Let's talk about cognitive skills. So could you give me like a really high level, like if we're talking about cognitive empathy and we're talking about the average person learning, I want to talk in just a second about the particular context that you're writing about, but what does even learning empathy mean? What does it look like? What does it look like to be not empathetic and then to be empathetic? Because you gave us a definition of empathy, but could you talk a little bit more about like, what does the transition look like for someone to be someone who struggles to think empathetically and then someone who learns to think empathetically, if that makes sense?
I think we should continue with the story that you mentioned there about being in the hole, because I think that could be really helpful. Mm-hmm. And when talking about being empathetic, it does help to define sympathy and compassion and judgment, right? If we imagine ourselves as the person standing on the top of the hole, which actually really, we've been rewatching Parks and Rec. And the whole, I don't know if you've seen it, but the whole first season is about this giant pit in the town, and they're trying to solve it, and people keep falling in the hole. So this is just
very, good visual imagery for this one.
So, standing on top of the hole and saying, oh, that sucks to be you, right? That's pretty judgmental. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not very helpful. It's kind of close to sympathy of, oh, I feel sorry for you, which, as Brene Brown says, we think it's helpful, but it's really creating distance between the person speaking and the person receiving that, the person in the hole in that case. And it emphasizes that the person speaking is not experiencing what the other person is, and makes them feel even more alone. And as Brene Brown again has said, possibly the only feeling worse than feeling shame is feeling alone. And sympathy, saying, I'm sorry that happened to you, things like that. And they're so common is the thing. Like, you talk about learning empathy and being naturally empathetic. So many of it, we learn these phrases from the people around us. And if those people did not focus on learning empathy and speaking to us with empathy, even if they're very nice people, and then we learn that, oh, when something bad happens to someone, you say, I'm sorry that happened to you. Even if you're feeling compassion for them and you're those kinds of phrase, like the words matter, and they create distance. Mm-hmm. So instead, something empathetic, as you mentioned, is simply, you could go down into the hole with them and sit with them, or you could simply sit on the side of the hole and just listen to them. And I think just listening to someone is so key there. But listening is not, how did you get down in the hole? Can I get you a shovel? Like what have you, it's not like, here, like, let me tell you what to do. It's, hey, how can I help? What have you already tried to get out of this hole? Mm-hmm. Like, it's understanding and helping the answer come out of them. And I think this is one thing that people have brought up to me from the book of has been really challenging for them, but also really helpful in their personal lives, is not offering suggestions. When someone says, oh, I had such a rough day today, my boss yelled at me, not saying, oh, like, have you considered getting a new job? Like, what did he do? Like, what, like, are you like, did you go talk to someone? Like not asking them a ton of questions or giving them suggestions like you should go talk to HR. It's like, oh, yelled at you? God, like how did that make you feel? Like right? Like that's what it is.
Yes.
And so I spend, a huge part of the book, just which I call How to Talk So People Will Talk, which other empathy nerds might recognize that from, the famous book, what is it? Is it How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and How to Listen So Kids Will Talk, which is one of my favorite books and also has some great cartoons in it about empathy. But How to Talk So People Will Talk. And a lot of it is about not talking and not using the kinds of phrases that we are socially conditioned to use, like, I'm sorry that happened to you, or why did this happen? And, telling them what to do.
I love that. And it lines very well up with the definition you gave of empathy, which has a lot to do with validating their perspective and their opinions. And it's really tough to do that without listening first, right? Like you can't know what you're validating. You can't know what you're holding as maybe not like good, like, because one of the, like I listened to your interview with Justin Jackson, which I'll link in the show notes, y'all, but he was giving an example of someone who was interviewing a flat earther and saying, like, what does it look like to fully allow that perspective to be something that I guess I don't know if the right words, because valid feels like you're saying they're potentially correct. But I felt like when you defined empathy, you gave me some words that are now slipping my mind of like, I am fully giving space to understand this. And a lot of things that you just said in terms of like space for them to talk, like you can't understand them. You can't understand them until you actually heard what they're saying. You can't hear the initial thing and try to fix the thing without understanding what's going on. So anyway, I feel like I'm taking what you said and muddying it a little bit.
Well, I agree with that. Like, it doesn't mean saying what they're saying is right? I always want to be very clear about that. You talk to somebody who's a flat earther, you're not saying, oh yeah, like, I agree with you, that makes sense. You can say, I can see why you would think that. Like, that's a very different phrase, or it makes sense why you think that. That is a very different phrase than, yes, I agree. Like, those are two very different things, because agreeing is judgment.
Yeah. Disagreeing
is judgment. Man. Simply saying that it makes sense from their perspective is just mirroring.
Yeah. Or I understand. I understand what you're saying. I understand why you're saying it or whatever. Mm-hmm. That's cool. So let's transition a little bit into the specific context that you're writing about. If we're talking about not just empathy in general, not just cognitive empathy in general, but we're talking about using it at work. I talked a lot in my talk about how programmers should use it, but I think you're focused a little bit more on a broader swath of people. If you're working with customers, you could be a programmer, you could be a business owner, you could be a copywriter, whatever. Can you kind of give me the tease of the book, of the general kind of what's the pitch you're making to business owners and people who run software as a service and that about what the benefit is, about what the steps are to get there, kind of what's the general TLDR of applying empathy in the particular context you're writing about?
Yeah, so sort of the general idea is that you could have a more successful business if you use empathy to understand your customers. That sounds like a lot.
Simple enough.
People often know they should talk to their customers, but maybe they don't really know how, or they're like, well, I talk to them in customer support all the time. Why do I need to talk to them more? But really interviewing them is really helpful, and taking that space to understand their perspective and what they're trying to do and why they've come to you, and then how you can serve them better, how you can sell them more things, how you could, make them stay, how you could
make more things that they want in the first place.
And so the idea of the book is to make it as easy for people to get started with that, because it's, I have been talking to people for years about this. Sort of became known among a subset of founders as somebody who's really into customer interviewing. And so had calls pretty regularly with just kind of helping people get started about it. And people were really nervous about what they would say and what kind of questions they would ask. So the meat of the book is both how to speak with empathy and how to treat someone with empathy. And then there's also specific scripts for common situations. So whether you're trying to figure out what you should create, or you want to know why they bought something, you want to know why they canceled, there's a whole bunch of different scripts in there and lots of specific phrases you can use to ask them questions, follow with them, and get the things that'll help you make better strategy decisions, better marketing decisions, product decisions, all these kinds of things to ultimately have a product or service that they want to use, they want to keep using, and they want to tell their friends about.
I love it. And if somebody was outside of the kind of the bootstrap founder world that you and I are both in, but it's actually a relatively small world, they may not have heard how common it is for people to be having these questions about like, like I built this thing and nobody's coming. Or, the teachers who are trying to say, don't do that thing, right? Like first figure out what people actually want and then build what they want. And so I do think that like the idea that it's abnormal advice to even consider customers and the customer base before you just build that thing that you're excited about, that's already kind of foundationally setting people up who've heard this advice or who haven't heard this advice to just understand that like this is already kind of like a different way of thinking, if that makes sense, to just think about the customers. Like just the fact that someone can say, hey, you should make sure there's a target market before you spend 1,000 hours building a software as a service seems like wild advice to people. So it seems like what you're suggesting is not only empathy in interviews, but I think a lot of people are learning from you just the concept of interviews, how to do interviews, that you should do interviews when the interviews make sense. So, and that it was kind of interesting to me because we call it a book about empathy, but it's also just a book about interviewing customers, which again, like in theory, if you're running a software as a service or a company or something like that, you've got customers and you exist to serve maybe a couple different groups. And I was actually curious to hear from you how you balance those groups. Because, for example, I run an agency. It's not exactly the same as a software as a service, but I'm trying to make sure that my clients are happy. But within my clients, you've got the owners, the people who sign the checks. You've got the product managers, the project managers. You've got the individual programmers we're working with. And you also have their customers. And then we've got my team. Right, you've got the individual programmers who are working on the project, and then also you got me and Dan trying to actually make money in the end of the day. There's all these different people we're trying to understand. So I wonder whether you've gotten any kind of pushback or anything like that, or you have any thoughts about what does it look like not only to care more about your customers and your clients, but also to have like a really healthy balance in your head of being empathetic towards multiple people, including yourself, in your decision making. Like, let's say I do a really great customer interview that you taught me how to do, and now I walk away, I'm like, oh, I really understand it, but that's going to make me miserable, or that might harm this other person. Like, what does it look like to keep these things in balance?
I feel like what you're underscoring here, and I'm so glad you are, is the concept of boundaries, which is something that I didn't really dive into in the book, and I've been thinking about how to write a newsletter about this. Because we need to have empathy for ourselves, right? We need to understand why a particular request or client or project might make us feel stressed out, right? And listening to customers doesn't mean verbatim doing everything that they say, right? Like, and this is a really common misperception people have. You're always weighing this against, your what's viable and feasible for you to build and deliver, right? Like if it's not viable for you to sell something to a client, even though they really want it, then it's just not going to work. And you could move mountains to try to make it happen, but you're not going to be very happy and you're not going to want to do it again. And so having those boundaries, which I talk about in the book as more as like frameworks of, looking for the things that they talk about that are problems that are frequent and painful, because they're more likely to pay for those things. Or, as I mentioned, using Marty Kagan's framework for successful products, which is that they're viable for the company, valuable for the customer, feasible for the company to build, and then usable by the customer, using all of those different things. But really what they're talking about is boundaries and not letting yourself be run over by someone. And I think actually this is something that's been really interesting. So the book has been teaching a lot of people about the concept of empathy. And, I say that like most people don't sit down with their daily to-do list and write, be more empathetic. They write a landing page, build a thing, sell more stuff. Like that's the stuff that ends up on the to-do list. And so basically what I've joked that my sort of secret mission with the book is to teach people empathy through stuff they're already trying to do. So for most people, they're really learning about empathy and that it's something they're capable of being. But for the people who are natural empaths or whose parents learned about empathy and then treated them with empathy, and so they're more attuned to it. I've had people come to me and say, I've actually learned that, I'm naturally empathetic. And I've realized that a lot of people come to me for advice and to be that sort of for support. And that exhausts me, and that I'm not getting empathy from anybody else, because empathy needs to be a two-way street. You need to both give it and receive it.
Yeah.
And so that's been a really interesting angle here. And that's kind of, I feel like all of this, whether it's, should we build this project that is, normally takes us 4 weeks and they're asking for it in one, or, like we're talking about boundaries fundamentally. And I think boundaries is a really, really important thing to be conscious of. It's a really hard thing to both be conscious of and to enforce them as well. And I feel like that's something that went far beyond the topic of the book, but is also an undercurrent at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that it's certainly something that people who are currently empathetic, whether it's because they recently learned it or were kind of raised this way, have to grapple with. But I also think it's very, it's a useful thing if someone, because I think one of the potential objections to the things that you're proposing in the book could be, if I just go and ask these customers what they think, well, then now I'm going to feel like I need to do all the things they say, right? And I do think that, like, even with the guy who's interviewing the flat earther, there's a natural predisposition we have to presume that if I am giving this person space to say the thing without correcting it, therefore I'm inherently agreeing with it, and it's interesting for us to cultivate in ourselves the ability to, just like you've been saying this whole time, hear and validate and understand somebody else's opinion without internalizing it or choosing to pass judgment in agreement on it or disagreement on it, and just let it sit there. Like, it's a gray that I feel like we aren't culturally used to be able to just hear it and not have to yell it down, or choose to internally. And so I think for that reason, I think sometimes people interview your customers empathetically, and maybe at least subconsciously believe that they're correct and do everything they say, right?
Yeah.
So
it's why I also in the book use Chris Voss's definition. Chris Voss is a former FBI hostage negotiator who wrote a book on negotiations called Never Split the Difference, who says the beautiful thing about empathy is that it doesn't mean you agree with them. And his book, which is fantastic, also talks a lot about how you don't have to agree with someone. The people he's negotiating with, the people he's using empathy with, are bank robbers. They've taken hostages. They're threatening to blow things up. Maybe they have blown things up, right? Like, these are incredibly high stakes situations with people who are not very sympathetic. And how do you get into a space where you can talk to them in a way where they feel understood, they feel seen, and you get the end result, which is in many cases the direct opposite of what they want. They want to rob the bank. The hostage negotiator wants them to not rob the bank. But you can use empathy, or he can, I don't know if I can, to get out of that situation. So it doesn't mean that you agree with them. And I love including that in the book, I think, kind of for that crowd that's like, oh, this is very soft and, it means I agree with him. Like, no, like, if the FBI uses this when they're negotiating with terrorists, like, you can also use it.
Yeah, and not only that, but like, and I think you said this once or twice in your interviews, like, he's a badass, right? Like, it's not just that he's like the soft guy of the FBI. No. The FBI had other tactics that weren't working, and then this guy now trains other people to use these tactics because it actually freaking works. Yeah. So now everyone wants to be like this, and he'll say things. He'll just be like, "Yeah, I mean, I originally didn't think this was the way that was going to work, and then I discovered that it turns out being able to take this kind of mental space with them is actually the most functionally effective thing." And not to say that, like, everyone's going to be a dude bro who just like hears empathy and says, "Oh, that's soft" or whatever. But I do think that some of us, especially who haven't been raised around that context, there's just maybe a subconscious expectation that doing that is sort of like a giving in and no longer having your own desires or anything. And like, as someone who, I think I come from a background that's very empathetic but very bad at caring for what I care about. So empathy is very easy for me, but focusing on my own desires is very hard for me. And so it was really helpful for me to hear his perspective, and also some of the things you said, of just remembering that, like, hearing this perspective of the other person has nothing to do with not caring for your own perspective. It has nothing to do with not having your own vision. It has nothing to do with not being empathetic with yourself. It just means the skill, the learned skill, is more than anything else a combination of listening and being able to hold those two things in tension at the same time. Like, validating and understanding and hearing your thing does not mean devalidating and whatever the opposite would be, my own perspectives or that of my programmers or that of my team or whatever else. So I appreciate that a lot, and the way you kind of have teased that out. So of course, this is not all just a sales pitch for this book, but if anybody is in this space, you should definitely get and read her book, 100%. So we're getting close to wrapping up on time. You know that I've got one question I'm going to ask you at the end, but before I do, is there anything you wanted to cover today about your topic that we didn't get a chance to cover yet?
I've been really curious about your perspective on all of this, because this is a topic that you are so interested in as well. And I think the important thing there is that whether it's programming or whether it's running a business, empathy can be used in any situation, but it also doesn't have to be used all the time. Yeah. And this is something that what you were just saying about being nurtured to show empathy for other people, but maybe not for yourself. I like to stress to people that, the conversation tactics I talk about in the book, it's really helpful to practice them on people in your personal life, practice them on your coworkers. You can have a lot of benefit from that. You do not have to be empathetic all the time. It's an action. It's not an emotion. But there are some times when you're not in the space to just simply quietly listen, and you really want to just relate to someone, right? And to put yourself in a space of being empathetic all the time is exhausting and not practical, and also robs you of receiving empathy yourself from other people. And I just feel like this is kind of something that gets a little bit missed in the sort of self-help empathy world sometimes. That, like, you don't have to be empathetic all the time.
I love that. It's funny because there's certainly like a perspective of it that would say what you just said is like a bad thing, right? Like, how dare you suggest that I should not be considering other people all the time? But the thing is, you mentioned a few things. It's very difficult to receive empathy when you're in a place where you're hyper focused on the other person. And like my very, very, very good friend and mentor, who will probably listen to this and hopefully give me enough grace to know I'm not criticizing him. He and I had a conversation recently where he was talking about something very difficult that he's going through, and immediately afterwards said, but everyone's got it much worse than me. I'm fine. I don't have COVID or whatever. And just kind of immediately jumped to this perspective of like, empathy, maybe that's not the right word for it, but just kind of like, what I'm going through can't be that bad and he's a deeply empathetic person who's just like, I understand how difficult other people have it right now. And so I shouldn't have even talked to you about this negative thing. I'm like, bro, no, like, thank you for telling me about this. Thank you for making this a space that is safe for you to be able to have talked to me about this. And I don't know if I would have been that way in the past. I'm very grateful to be in a place where I'm like, dude, you had a hard time, and it's okay. That other people having hard times does not make your hard time any easier, right? It just, and so just allow yourself to have had a hard time and to talk to your friend about it. And likewise, I think in business context, there's both really helpful ways to have empathy in non-traditional expected empathies. Like, for example, when we have conflict with our clients, and it feels to me like this is going to be the moment where they have to fire us or we have to fire them because this is not working. There's two elements of that are both times where it's really helpful to use empathy and really helpful to just have to turn it off at that moment. The really helpful to use empathy with me, and I know this is not my podcast to interview, so I'm going to be short. The really helpful time for me is when they are doing something that seems really, really unreasonable to us. And so in that moment, our default response is to like put up a wall and say, no, we're not going to do that. We can't do that. That's the wrong decision. And the more empathetic response as a client relationship manager type role for me has I've discovered to be instead saying stop, and even though we don't agree with what they're saying, let's stop. And I've often used like a visual analogy, so sorry non-YouTubers, but like I'm on one side and they're on one side, and we are coming with opposite perspectives, and we're kind of butting into each other. And so I tell my team the direct desire instead is to come alongside them and then say, cool, we understand why you're coming this way, we understand why this is what you want, however, we think that that's not going to work to keep going the same direction. Now can I guide you a little bit to the left or guide you a little bit to the right? I understand and validate your perspective, but here's the problem we're all going to run to as we together walk the same way, right? We together are walking this way and it ain't working, but you may not realize that yet. So we got to go a little left or we got to go a little right or something like that. And so that's a way to turn a conflict into an alignment. And then at that point, we don't have to say, no, we're not going to do this thing you want, because that's not a healthy thing to do with the client. But instead, we're going to say, if you do this thing you want, you're going to have these negative consequences that I don't think you want to suffer. And I don't think I want to suffer them either. Here's some other alternatives. So for me, that's the time where, as a client relationship person, it's very helpful to use it. When I find that at work it's got to be turned off is, interestingly, if my empathy for my the people who work for me makes me realize that the actions of somebody who doesn't work for me is damaging them, then I have to go to the point with that client or whatever else and just say, I'm sorry, and I can potentially understand the reasons why you're behaving this way, but right now what you're doing is unacceptable, and we need to change this, or we need to not work together. And in that moment, for me, that's a really hard conversation to have, because I'm a conflict avoidant person by nature, and all I want to do is say, I completely understand why you're being this way. Let's just work on it together. But by doing so, I would be disrespecting the experiences of my programmers as I had empathy for them and how difficult the situation was, right? So there is an element where empathy is helpful for us for understanding other people, but sometimes it can get in the way of us having hard conversations because we're too busy trying to people please them, to just do the thing that needs to be done. So anyway, sorry, that was like a very long response to your prompt, but thank you for asking about that.
I feel like what you just said is so important, because empathy does not mean being nice. It does not mean letting people do whatever they want to you. It doesn't mean sacrificing yourself at the altar of other people. Empathy requires boundaries. And as you said, when your team is in a difficult situation, you need to lay down the boundary with the client. And there may be situations where, as you said, you're butting heads and you're going back and forth on something and it's not working. And in that situation, it may not feel empathetic to lay down a boundary and say, this isn't going to work. But what you can also do is use empathy to understand, okay, what are they trying to do in the first place? What are we trying to do in the first place? And then how can we expand the pie from a negotiations phrase standpoint? How can we expand the pie and do something that gets what they want done, does it in a way that we can do it, but is maybe different? And I think that can be very hard to do that when you're always looking for other people's context to weigh those against each other, and it can feel mean to put down a boundary. But fundamentally, putting down that boundary is having empathy for yourself and for your own context, and allowing yourself to have that. And
come on,
I'm more reminded here of I don't know if you're familiar with the trauma typology of the 4 different ways of responding to trauma. So there's the fight response. We're all pretty familiar with that. There's the flight response, which can be running away or, working a lot or exercising or whatever. There can be a freeze response, which I sort of think of as like hiding under a blanket and avoiding the world. And there's also the fawn response, which is what you said, of people pleasing. And I find that for people who see themselves in the fawn trauma response, empathy can be very difficult, because chances are in their life they have given 90% of the empathy and received 10% of it. Your friend reminds me of someone who may have had to give a lot of empathy in their life, but if their response to themselves is, other people have had it worse, I don't have a right to feel this way, that's telling me that's somebody else's voice that has become their own internal voice, and they have not received enough empathy themselves.
That's really good. I hate that we're at 45 minutes because I want to dive into this for another hour.
This I could talk about this all day. I mean, this is the whole topic of this podcast, right?
I know. Okay. Wow. I'm going to sit with this one. I'm going to go back and listen to this one multiple times and just sit with it. But for the sake of the constraints that I have put on here, I'm going to ask you your last question. What insight or support did you receive or need when you were younger that you hope more people give to others?
Therapy.
Oh my God. I thought you might say empathy because of what you just said. Therapy. Come on. Yes. I don't even know if there's anything else we need to say. Do we need to say anything else about it?
I think
Go get therapy,
I think therapy is the greatest gift I've ever given myself. And I think for people who, did not learn empathy or did not receive a lot of it, I'm thinking about your friend and I don't want to project too much onto his experience. But if your reaction to when you go through something or you share something difficult with someone, you allow yourself to be vulnerable, is to say, but other people have it worse. This isn't really that bad. I really shouldn't be complaining. You have not received a lot of empathy in your life, and you would probably tremendously benefit from therapy, because one of the jobs of the therapist is to be empathetic with you. And I feel like I really learned empathy from being in therapy, from receiving it myself. And I think sometimes people have this perception that therapy is, sort of like going to the doctor. You only go if you have a broken bone. You only go if there's something broken within you, right? But
Right.
I think everybody deserves therapy. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Everyone can use more empathy in their lives. And the more you receive it, which is the therapist's job to give it to you, the more you can give it, because you feel heard. And you don't have to struggle to feel heard in these other situations of when people are sharing things with you, of feeling like you have to offer your own experience because your experience has not been heard. And so, if I could give younger me anything, it would be therapy.
I love that. And it's like a therapist's job. Also, a good therapist to me shows you that balance of boundaries and empathy and all that kind of stuff. Like a good therapist both makes you feel heard and understood, and also tells you about yourself when you need to, right? Like a good therapist believes those things and also does not internalize the emotions of every single person they talk to, because they couldn't do that healthily. So it's cool, because I didn't even thought about that. Like they also are a little bit of a role model of healthy and responsible empathy.
And they have therapists themselves. That's a very important part of being a therapist, is having a therapist yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. Also could talk about this for an hour, but we're at the end. So if people think you're amazing and they want to learn more from you or make sure they can send their money your way, how do they follow you? How do they support you? Obviously buy the book, but where's the ideal place to buy the book? Where should they follow you? Tell us about it.
Yeah. So you probably just find me on Twitter. I'm at MJW Hansen. That's Hansen with an EN at the end. I probably spend too much time on Twitter. And then the book, you can find it at deployempathy.com. From there, you'll find a link to buy a physical version of the book on Amazon. There are also PDF and Kindle and ebook options. I'm also doing an audiobook that I'm in the progress of recording, and I'm releasing it every week as a private podcast. So it started at the end of August, and it'll go about halfway through the book right now. So it'll go for a while. And so then you just get a couple of chapters in your inbox every week as they are being recorded. But that's...
I had no idea I missed that, but I am going to do
all
that
from deployempathy.com.
Awesome. I love it. Michele, it was an absolute freaking pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining today. All right, y'all, until next week, be good to each other.